Hi there. They say that a war is not truly over until the last person who fought in that war has died. And I wanted to share with you the motivation that I have for capturing these Fighting Men of Rhodesia stories. Um, it, because really for all of us the clock is ticking, and just in the last few weeks I've lost so many of my army buddies, some from the coronavirus, guys like Dennis Crowcamp, who won the Bronze Cross of Rhodesia, Andy Johnston, who won the Cross of Honor or the Honoris Crux. And these guys were real heroes, warriors, fantastic lives and interesting stories that have now gone with them. And I just feel it's vitally important for us to capture these stories for posterity before it's too late. I remember when my dad was dying, we were in Cape Town, and he grew up in near Uppington, in the Kalahari Desert, and I decided to take him up to the Kalahari Desert with my two sons. And so there were three generations of us Van Zels in the bakkie. And as we were driving up there, every little town we went through on the way, my dad would have a story about that town. Really interesting stories. And as we were driving up to the desert, and we were going over these endless dunes, you know, we would get to a dune and my dad would say, okay, now over the next dune. They all looked exactly the same to me, but he remembered from when he was a child. You know, he'd say, as we get over the next dune, there's a pan there, and this is where I sat with my dad on top of that dune, and we shot 9 gemsbuck, you know, and then we'd climb to the top of the dune, and sure enough, there'd be a pile of Mauser doppies from my grandfather in the exact spot where my dad pointed out. And you know, it was just amazing. I mean, he shot his first lion at the age of 11 in the Kalahari Desert. He got his black belt in traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu in 1936, before World War II. He taught Spitfire pilots in World War II, was you know, had the most incredible stories to tell, and I wish I'd been able to capture those stories for my grandchildren. And you know, I just didn't have the knowledge of how to do it in those days. It was before smartphones, and I didn't know how to make videos, and I wasn't terribly gifted, or am still not a terribly gifted writer. And so, you know, those stories, unfortunately, because I can't remember them all, have, you know, gone with my dad. And I just feel it's vitally important that we capture as many of these stories as we can. And I really appreciate the support that a lot of you guys are giving this channel. I particularly want to thank Rhodesian Brushstroke for the cap and the t-shirt that I'm wearing, which is in authentic Rhodesian camouflage. Jeff, you're such an awesome supporter of this, an enthusiastic supporter of this channel. I can't thank you enough for all that you've done for me. Right, before we get into this video, I want to just apologize for the audio-visual quality. I have interviewed my old troop sergeant in 14 Troop 3 Commando, Log Enslin, who will be well known to many of you. Log joined the army in 1969 as a recruit and spent his entire time in the RLI, right up until 1980. So from 1969 to 1980, ending up as CSM of Support Commando. And Log also has a number of stories to tell. In this episode, we're going to be focusing on his 7 years that he spent in 3 Commando, and and in the next episode, we'll focus on the time he spent in support commando, which is when the war was really hot. Unfortunately, the audio and the visual don't always sync up. The audio is not bad, but the visual sometimes lags a little bit. So one of the challenges we have as trying to produce kind of podcasts is that we're often limited by the equipment that the person is using on the other side. I have taken some of the money that I've received in support from you guys and used it to buy a nice top quality professional microphone for Hannes. So hopefully in future you'll enjoy good quality audio from Hannes. But you know, it all depends what audio and visual equipment the person who's being interviewed has. And sometimes it's not just that, it's the internet bandwidth as well, which lowers the quality of everything so it can flow down the pipeline. And in this instance, it seems as though the audio was coming through just fine, but the visual was lagging a little bit. So you'll hear the words and then you'll see the lips move. Now, if that's terribly off-putting for you, I do apologize. If necessary, close your eyes and listen to the audio and just pretend it's just an audio podcast rather than an audio-visual one. But Log has an interesting story to tell, and I hope you enjoy this one. Thank you. Welcome, and let's. I'm gonna not talk too much. I'm gonna let you do all the talking. Where would you like to start?
Thanks, John. Yeah, that was basically how I ended up in the RLI, but going to Llewellyn and getting recruited by the RLI.
Come a bit closer to the mic, yeah.
And getting recruited by the RLI recruiting team. I must admit, when those oaks arrived in their green uniforms, the number ones, it was really something special. Eh?
Yeah.
And yeah, as I said, 13 of us decided this is the thing. We're going to go and do this thing. And off we buggered off. And when we got to the RLI, the recruit course was already on the go. So we had to do our own little thing. We had like 4 weeks to catch those guys up. And we had our own instructors and everything. And anyway, we caught those guys up. And all due respect, that at the end of the day, when we passed out, most of us were all the top students of that particular recruit course.
Wow.
And yeah, quite a few of us were sent to 3 Commando. And when we arrived in 3 Commando at the end of November, 3 Commando was deployed on border control. So we sort of hung around, and then 3 Commando came back and we all went home for Christmas for a bit. And then back on the grindstone in early January 1970. And wasn't long in January 1970, then birds broke out. And one commando of the 1st Oaks to be deployed on birds. And we followed about 2 to 3 weeks later out there.
Right.
And, you know, here we were in end of January, patrolling those bloody mountains in Sipalilo, the Escarpment and Zambezi Valley.
Yes.
And of course, being quite a tall guy, I was lumbered with the MAG, you know, the proverbial.
Yeah.
And we patrolled for quite a few weeks and things like that without anything. And I remember it was one morning, it was the 1st of February, early in the morning, some guy had come and reported that there was a group of terrorists had been in his village in the night. And off we hurtled with the cops and the dog. And the dog's name was Brutus. And anyway, we picked up the spoor, and of course, the follow-up started. And I remember as the day wore on, I thought, are we ever going to catch these guys, you know? And we were crossing a small little river. And I heard the oak of the dog say, these tours are here, right here.
Sure.
And he said, and somebody, I think Phil Roth, who was our sergeant, said, okay, well, let the dog loose. Anyway, the dog took off. Now, me being lumbering along with this MAG, I was moch, I tell you. And next minute, all hell let loose. And as I said, so there at 10:30 in the morning on the 1st of February, it was a Sunday, it was my very first contact.
Sure.
And, you know, being an 18-year-old soldier, I knew nothing. And I was too scared to even fire the MOG because I didn't know where my own guys were because the grass was so long. And I wasn't just going to start shooting at something that I didn't know what to shoot at.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, we eventually, and then I heard old Dennis Crokham yelling, "You guys follow me." And he took off with a whole lot of guys through the river. And we had some artillery guys with us that day.
Huh.
And as the one artillery guy was crossing through the river, he sort of looked down and said, there we saw all the Terps gapping it down the river. Anyway, Dennis Crokham took his position up on the side of the hill and was ready to give covering fire whilst we did the sweep. And anyway, we started to do the sweep, and when we got to where the terrorists had been hiding in this thick bush, and that there were, I think, one dead guy there. Anyway, we swept through, and that was it. That was my first contact. And anyway, that night, we had to go and do ambush positions all over the show. And we just settled in ours on like a little hill. And old Dennis Crokham with these guys wasn't too far away. I was with old Sergeant Fulroth because I was his MOG gunner. And not long after that, old Dennis Crokham came on the radio. Yeah, they just caught one Terps just walked into their ambush position. So I was like, yeah, these guys are around here somewhere. Anyway, dark came and we settled down and it started to rain. And I was on guard duty. And all of a sudden I heard these voices in Shona speaking. Jeez. And I got one more of a fright because I thought, yeah, the guys were directly underneath us here, you know. So I quickly wake up old Fulroth. I said, yeah, the Terps are yeah. He said, you bloody idiots, the bloody sky shout. They were doing a sky shout, telling the guys to surrender. And of course, I couldn't understand Shona, so yeah. Anyway, that was the end of that. You know, we carried on doing patrols, and eventually most of the Terps were caught or shot and things like that. But that was my first and last contact in Birch. And not long after that, we went back to barracks at Cranbourne, back to normal RLI life, you know. And in those days, RLI life was consisted of weapon training in the day, PT, and of course the proverbial drill parade on a Friday. Every Friday was RSM's drill parade. Whilst we were there, February, March, we were coming along, and the whole battalion was back, and we all started to practice for the trooping of the colour.
Yes.
Which took place in June that year.
Right.
And Commando, being the champion commander, was the escort to the colour.
Right.
And old Don Price had the honour of being the bearer of the RLI colours in that particular parade.
Was Robin Tarr the RSM in those days?
He was then, yeah. Robin Tarr was the RSM. And yeah. I don't know where that guy had an eagle eye from. I think, you know, some people say it was a bullshit story. He just picked on any guy. But he was yelling at the oaks as he came out of the RSM. As he came out of his headquarters, he was already screaming at some oak for fidgeting or something like that on his parade ground, you know. But what a man, eh? And what a bone duck. I think even the officers were bloody bum of him.
Yeah.
And yeah, time progressed and we did the parade, and it was a great thing, and it was great to be part of that particular thing. And it wasn't long after that, there was a thing going around, we would like to go on a tracking course.
Okay.
So I immediately stuck up my hand, because, well, there's one way of getting rid of this MOG is to become a tracker.
Yeah.
And anyway, off I went on the tracking course. There was quite a few of us from 3 Commando, the 2 Haasbrooks, and myself, and somebody else, I can't remember who. And there was guys from 1 Commando, SAS, but the thing about that tracking course is the guys who ran it. And our instructors was Andre Rabi, Judge Franklin, Darryl Watt, and Joop Oosthuizen. And then also on that particular tracking course, I met the famous Al Toole, ex-GSM of 3 Commando.
Right.
Who distinguished himself during Op Colden, Op Birch, not Op Birch, and Op Griffin and all that, acting as the CSM of 3 Commando.
Right, he won the
And the
Bronze
tracking
Cross.
course, he did indeed. And the tracking course was great. I mean, we had incredible instructors. Those guys, they're bushcraft. I mean, never mind just learning how to track. The bushcraft one learned and what to do. Your whole sixth sense you became a changed person, you know.
Yeah.
And how to operate in the bush and all the strange things to look for, using your nose, your senses. It was unreal, and I really enjoyed that course.
Yeah.
And
if I could just interrupt you there, Log, you know, one of the weird things I talk about is how after a few months in the bush, I found my sense of smell started becoming very acute. So if some guy brushed his teeth with toothpaste or something, you could smell him from like 100 meters away, you know. And
you could,
you know, yeah, it's amazing how your senses actually become heightened once you're living in the bush, you know.
It does, you know. It was about towards the end of November 1970. Myself, Haasbrooks, there were 8 of us. Robin Skolkfake, Alistair Kurzweil, Russell Jenkinson, trying to think, and we were all dragged into the OC's office area, and we were told to prepare. We're off to go and help the Portuguese. They need trackers. And off we shift, and our Lieutenant Freddie Watts, he was our boss man to look after us, and the 8 of us onto a deck, and off we flew to Chikoa. And, you know, there was a big eye-opener. The Rhodesian Air Force was already there with their choppers and their proverbial provost and things like that. And we based up on this huge, huge airfield. And I've never seen so many choppers in my life. And of course, with all the Portuguese soldiers and things like that. But it was quite an eye-opener, that too. And seeing so many helicopters, you know, we weren't used to that in the Rhodesian army. And you only saw a helicopter when you either dropped on top of a relay or whatever. And there we were in December, and sitting on the banks of the Zambezi, and nothing much happened, but every Thursday, without fail, we were called out because that was their resupply run that day. And the Frelimo would ambush that resupply run without fail. So every morning on a Thursday, by about 10 o'clock, we were already sitting in the choppers waiting to go because we knew it was coming. And we would arrive at where the vehicles had been ambushed or driven over a landmine, and we would pick up the spoor and would follow tracks. We never really managed to close with the Frelimo in those days because the anti-tracking was good, but we were good too, you know, the trackers were good, but we never closed with them. One of the biggest things we found on that particular story was the soldiers, the Portuguese soldiers. Now, you had different soldiers. You had the Paracadish and you had the normal run-of-the-mill soldier. The Paracadish, if you were with them, they were very professional. But the other guys were, you know, they were fighting in a war, thousands and thousands of miles from home. So their heart wasn't quite in it, you know. And they were forever, you know, come 11 o'clock, it was siesta time. I mean, and we would stop for like 3 hours. I mean, how are you going to try and follow up guys that you're going to have a 3-hour break whilst it was hot? But anyway, that was life, and we just had to accept it. But I remember the one day we were been tracking since about 10 o'clock, and it was like about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we hadn't closed with these guys yet. And we arrived at like a bit of a base camp type area, and there were these holes and trenches. And we were standing and looking, wonder what these things are for.
Sure.
And old Alistair Kurzweil said, he said, when the bloody proverbial hits the fan, I'm in there. And it's true as Bob. It wasn't, the words weren't out of his mouth when the proverbial hit the fan. And that was just the thing, you know. And he leapt into the trenches, and we just, all of us just stood in there. Nobody knew what was going on. And then it turned out that one of the Portuguese soldiers decided, no, it was now just time to Latville at something, you know what I mean?
Sure.
And yeah, you know, we spent our Christmas there. And the funny thing was, I'll never forget, on the Christmas night, we were told we were going to get mortared and stomped. So all lights were out, everything was dead and hushed. But not us RLI troopies. So we decided we're going to get bloody smashed. And first we did get. I remember Freddie was cutting us out the next day. Properly. But it was great fun. And eventually, after about nearly 4 weeks, we returned back to RLI. But when we drove through the gate at RLI, not one of us was dressed in Rhodesian army camouflage. We'd bartered it all for Portuguese kit. So here we arrived, dirty. Some of us were just pulled off the tracks as the next RLI unit came in to carry on the tracking. But that was something, eh? And it was a great experience, that. And it really was. And just being there, I tell you what, I learned a hell of a lot.
Yeah.
But there is one thing I want to mention prior to that, which I skipped the beat a bit here, was we were on a bush trip in the Zambezi Valley, my first border control, also in 1970. And we had just taken over from the SAP. And we were driving along in our landies, and lo and behold, there's this deep freeze lying in the middle of the road.
What?
So we decided, what's this? So we stopped, and it was full of grub. Eh? I mean,
Sure.
all the best rations you could think of were in that deep freeze. Anyway, so we loaded it up, and off we went. Eh? And 13 troop, we lived like a king, eh? In that bush trip. Eh?
Sure.
From tin peaches to spaghetti to, you name it. The best tin food you could think of was in that deep freeze. And cream, and it was unreal. But one of the highlights of that particular bush trip, which wasn't a highlight for two guys, but to me it was a highlight. The elephant were extremely aggressive there. And one of our patrols, old Pinball Penrose, Lance Corporal with Peter Pittman, they were out patrolling, and there was like an aircraft buzzing a herd of elephants. But anyway, what happened is they rounded this bush, and lo and behold, this elephant cow charged and grabbed hold of old Lance Corporal Penrose and was busy pinning him to the ground. Eh? And old Trooper Pittman, in all his brash or whatever, decided, now there's only one way to sort this out. I'll start clubbing the elephant with my rifle. Wow. And he did. He started to beat the elephant with his rifle. Eventually, the elephant sideswiped him into the bush, and that's actually what saved old Pinball's life. And old Bloodnut, as we called him, he was awarded the MFC operational for that. But anyway, that took part of care of 1970. And 71 dawned, and it was the RLI's 10th birthday. And once again, all the RLI was back in barracks, and it was back to drill. Because what they decided to do, the RLI was going to do a tattoo at the Glance Stadium. And part of that tattoo was a silent drill parade, 100 guys. And each commando supplied something in, and I was very grateful to be part of that. And we practiced for a long, long, long time on that thing, with old RSM Tar driving us. But we had it down to a fine art. And the beauty of that thing was, there was only one word of command right at the very beginning. And that was, by the front, quick march. And we went through various drill exercises, every single rifle exercise you could think of without a single word of command. And everything was done to the beat of a drum. So whilst everything was happening, you had to count your steps, because at each certain step, something happened. You know, and because what actually happened, we marched on as a column, and we split into 4. And it was all done by the beat of a drum and you counting your steps. Sure. So you had 4 groups of 25 guys scattered around the showgrounds in Salisbury, each doing their thing. And it was amazing. Eh? And of course, there was the mortar guys did their thing. And then later on in the year, we all went to Bulawayo to go and do the thing at the trade fair in Bulawayo. So yeah, it was really something. And then in April 71, support troop under Ronry Daly in those days were operating in the Mukumbura area. And one of their vehicles, the big thing was we always used to go and visit the Portuguese soldiers across the road. We used to go and barter for their tin food or their cerveja, whatever, whatever, go and play soccer, whatever. Anyway, one of the vehicles went across, and on its return in the Mukumbura River hit a landmine. And unfortunately, a couple of the guys were killed. But anyway, what transpired is that Don Price, myself, and the two Hasbrooks and Russell Jenkinson were flown out to Mukumbura and to go and see what we could do, to see if we could try and follow tracks, whatever. And whilst we were there, nobody really knew where to go. And I said to Don Price, I said, when I was operating with the Portuguese soldiers here in December, we actually spoke to a local guy that had been captured in the Mukumbura area there. And he said he'd been marched for about a day in the direction where the sun came up. And he said there was a huge base camp there on the edge of a river. And on a big bend with lots of big trees and all sorts. So anyway, Don went to Ron Daly with that info. And then he said, well, we've got nothing to lose. Let's go and have a look and see what we can find. Anyway, we would chop it out, us guys, with, I think, 3 sticks of support group, Ant White, the Van der Riet brothers, and all them, Bandy Emmerich, all part of that group. And it wasn't long when we were walking, and we were dropped on a dry riverbed. And we had been going about an hour following this course. And then we started to pick up a lot of tracks. A lot. And Hasbrook and I were sort of doing the tracking, and Don was sort of our looker after. Because one guy tracks, one guy keeps an eye out, because that's the way it works. And we said to Don, I said, listen, I'm flipping sure that all this is going to lead us to a camp somewhere along the line. He said, how do you actually know that? He said, well, I said, I don't know if you've noticed, have you seen the amount of baboon skulls that have been placed in trees and things like that? So he said, yeah, he's noticed. I said, what does that mean? I said, one of the things we noticed earlier on, whenever getting close to any habitat or thing, there was always some form of identification that you picked up. And I said, these baboon skulls are all pointing in the same direction. So I said, okay. Anyway, we've carried on and got to about lunchtime, and it's now time for a bit of a break, because, fortunately, when you're tracking, you got the easy route. It's the guys on your flank that are climbing up and down hills and whatever. So we're having a bit of a smoke break, lunch break, and Al-Hashi and I were about 100 meters ahead of the support group, follow-up troops. And I must admit, it was the first time for those support group troops to be in Mozambique. And, us guys being there, we moved about 100 meters ahead, as I said. And we were sort of quiet, and those guys were pretty noisy, and they were starting to annoy us. And anyway, it was time to walk. And I said, okay, I'll take this walk. Hasi, you got to look out for me. Anyway, and as we crossed, we were about to cross the river. I just happened to be looking down, and the water was still coming out of the guy's footprint in the river. And at the same time, Old Hasbrook let fly behind me. I said, what are you shooting at? He said, yeah, the guys are just in front of us. I said, well, I've just seen the water seeping back into the oak's footprint. But anyway, the guys scarpered, and we carried on. And it wasn't long after that, we found this massive camp, which had just been vacated. Anyway, all the guys are in. There was stuff lying around all over the show. And old Don Price said, you two guys, out you go. Go and have a look to see where these guys have gone. So I said, off I go. We go back through the riverbed again, climb up the bank. And on the other side of the bank was these guys' parade ground. That was their, well, obviously where they did their drill and whatever weapon training. It was a huge open area. And on the side of the parade ground was this hill of about 100 feet up, long type of hill. Anyway, we walked around, looked around, and there was just tracks everywhere. And we said, okay, well, looks like they've all gone this way. So let's go back. It was now about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Anyway, as we're going back to the river, I said to Arthur, hang on, stop. I said, because the minute we get back in the camp, we have to go again. All these oaks have been sitting having a smoke break. I desperately need of a cigarette right now. So I said, before we go in there, and there was this huge log, dead tree, sitting in the river with a puddle of water in it. So I said, yeah, well, we can fill our water bottles here, and I'm going to have a smoke. Anyway, we sat having a smoke, finished the smoke, filled up the water bottles, went back into the camp, said to John Passat, we know where they're gone. So he said, okay, lead the way. So Archie and I, no problem, off we go. But nobody's following us, so we don't see that. We're halfway across that riverbed. And I tell you what, I've never, ever in my life come under such intense fire. It was just a split second, and there was just bullets, and you just hear that horrible noise going past you. And Olasi and I, we just ran and we dived into that, behind that tree trunk. And of course, as we're lying behind the tree trunk, you just hear the bullet hitting into it. So I'm lying on my back and I'm looking, there's this great big fig tree directly above us. And you can see all the rounds that are being fired, hitting into the fig tree, into the bushes. I mean, it was intense. But the funny thing is, as we lay there, I thought, well, at least we're here, you know, we're all right. He said, are you? Yeah, we're both fine. And all we did was just basically put our rifle over the top of the log and just start shooting back. But the strange thing was there wasn't much help coming from the other guys at that stage of the game. And eventually things started to die down. And old Don Price says, are you okay there? He said, yeah, no, we're okay. He said, well, throw some white phos so we can get out of where we are because we can't move either. Anyway, we threw a couple of white phos grenades to give them some smoke. And they all doubled out the camp and formed up a sweep line on the bank on the other side and did a sweep through there. But of course, by then, the chaps had disappeared. But it was frightening. And anyway, that night we decided, okay, calling it quits now. And we based up on the top of that hill. And then the next morning went back down to the camp. But of course, the Frelimo had long gone. So yeah, that was a bit of an exciting moment for me.
Sure.
Then. And as I said, I've never in my whole life come under such intense fire as it was that day. And how the both of us got out of that thing, I still don't know.
Yeah.
I still don't know. 1971 came, went back. And basically, 71 was involved in border control and back at camp. And we would like go every 3 months on a stint at border control, the rest of the time back in camp. So life was pretty mundane in 1971. But I want to tell you a little story about in 1971. We were also patrolling in border control in the Mukumbura area. And there we were sitting on our Land Rovers, you know, all brazen, no tops on the verandas, all open, sitting in our shorts, no shirts on, hot as hell. And we arrived in this village, and there were 4 Land Rovers with all the guys sitting on them, and the Oaks chatting, or Bruce Fitzsimmons. Dave Hoppert was our Lieutenant Bruce Fitzsimmons, our troop sergeant at the time. And we were chatting, talking, and there was one of the locals leading this ox past us. And all of a sudden, this ox started to prance and jump. And I thought, what is wrong with this ox? Next minute, I realized what was going. We had parked underneath a baobab. And with all the vehicles idling, the smoke, it got these bees that were stuck in this baobab tree. Really, really pissed off. Anyway, the bees attacked us. And we just took off. Everything was just left on the Land Rovers, rifles, everything. We just ran to get away from the bees. And the oaks were badly stung. And anyway, now we decided how are we going to get our vehicles out of there. So no problem to old Bruce Fitzsimmons. He says, come on, Log, you crawl forward, you go and get a smoke grenade and pull a pin because the smoke will chase them away. So I said, well, what about you? He says, no, I'll come with you. so we can get a couple of smoke grenades, which we did. We got the smoke grenades out and got rid of the bees. But here the guys were stung. Oh.
Sure.
And anyway, that night we had to casevac 3 guys who were now allergic to bee stings. So that was another issue. But that was just a bit of humor that happened there. Yeah.
When you talk about the insects, you know, you can talk about the horse flies, the tsetse flies, the mapani flies, the mosquitoes.
Oh, yeah. And of course also the wild animals. You know, we had great fun with animals and things like that. And
yeah,
some interesting stories with animals.
Yeah.
One time when we were also on border control in the valley there, in the Kinyemba area there, and we'd done like a 2-day patrol, and we would arrive at our destination, so we were sleeping on this only little place that we could find, which happened to be an elephant track.
Sure.
And whilst we were dossing with our heads under the blankets, hiding from the mosquitoes, I heard one of the guys say, "Corporal," now talking to old Bruce Simmons, "can you hear that?" He says, "What? Can't you hear that elephant breathing?" Well, that is it, 4 oaks flew those blankets. And this elephant had come, you know, they are so quiet. Nobody even heard it coming. And it happened to stand directly above old Simon Hurlston.
Sure.
And was obviously looking down at these 4 figures lying in his road, and that's what he heard, was this elephant breathing. You know, and then 71 came and went, and into 72. And 72 was also quiet. There was a lot of just border control. But then in 1972, September, the RLI decided, no, they're going to do an HDF in Mozambique now. We're going to go and look for where all these sunlateurs are camping, basing up, and all sorts.
What is HDF?
So we all gathered at High Density Force.
Right.
Operation. So it was the whole of the RLI. Every single subunit was there. Everybody was there. And we had the Air Force backing us up and everything. And we were based at Nyamasoto airstrip there.
This Op Sable now?
Op Sable, yeah. And the trick was there. They decided that we're going to do a night march into Mozambique. So we were all choppered on down to the edge of the Rui River, and there we had to sit and wait. And 3 Commando was going to lead this night march. Or Colin Willis, being 11 troop, would start. So it was 11, 12, and 14 and 13. And 13 troop would bring up the rear. I was the last man of the 3 Commando line. Now you can imagine, now each guy was told to have a piece of 4x2 tied to his back. It was pitch black, no moon, no nothing. So the first obstacle we had to do was in the dark, cross over the Rui River. Well, that took ages. We had to get ourselves across 2 Commando and support group across that river in the dark. There were oaks falling in sinkholes. Radios were lost. It was a disaster. Eventually, everybody got across. Now the trek started. Now we're walking on the bank of the river. Now on the bank of the river is hundreds of little tributaries. So it's down a donga, up a donga, down a donga, up a donga. And this went on the whole night. Eventually, daylight came and a halt was called. But the oaks were finished, Anyway, now we've got to try and find a place to sleep. Being there, hot as hell, September in Mozambique, no trees, no shade, no nothing. But when I say the whole Commando went, even our Major Tar went, and he wasn't a young guy. Even old CSM Rockjaw Crane was on that trip. And I felt sorry for those guys because I thought, these oaks don't do PT like we do and all that. These oaks are going to take strain, And they did take strain. And, you know, we must have left a swath through that bush. Can you imagine 3 subunits marching through this bush during the night? That any blind could have followed. And anyway, the day dawned and we based up in the, trying to hide in the shade wherever you could. And poor old Robin Tar, I don't know what he did, but he kicked over his hot boiling water and burnt his legs. So anyway, a chopper had to be called. So I thought, oh, well, that's so much for the clandestine story now. Here we go.
Yeah.
chopper in the middle of nowhere landing. Anyway, that night 12 Troop took over the lead, and off we went. And it was, but this time it was a little bit better. And we actually came through some deserted base camps though during the night. And anyway, it was about close to midnight. We stopped on the banks of quite a big dry riverbed, and we were sort of having a break. And whilst we were having a break, the Frelimo decided to attack the Algamento on the Rui River there. And, you know, it was spectacular. All you saw was green and red tracer and mortars going and 75mm recoilless rifles being fired. And it was this huge gunfight going on over there. Anyway, we sat and watched all this. It was like Guy Fawkes. So then the powers that be decided, no, we're going to ambush right where we are in case the Frelimo used this as an escape route to the river. Anyway, everybody settled down. 2 commandos on the right, us on the left, and support group was behind us. Must have been about 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. 2 commando starts opening a fire. And I think every single oak in 2 commando was firing his rifle, MAG. The Icarus rockets were going. And I said to my oaks, I said, don't shoot unless you know what you're shooting at. Don't just open fire. Then all of a sudden the support group oaks started firing, and they were shooting from behind us. I mean, yeah. I said, guys, just hug the ground. Just stay low. Don't do anything. Just stay low. Because you don't know what you're going to shoot at. It's no good just firing. Anyway, eventually things died down. And old Freddie Watts, I don't know what he'd done that night. He tripped over a tree or branch or something like that. Anyway, he got pierced in the chest by a stick. So there was another helicopter casevac. So I said, well, this is now. So that was the end of the night marches. We carried on during the day, and eventually 2 commanders split where they were going to go, support groups split where they were going to go. Because what we were going to do, we were going to go and lay ambushes all over the countryside. And then one commander, once we were in position, one commander would start the sweeps. That took the rest of the week up, and nothing happened. Nobody saw or heard or even a sign of a terrorist or Frelimo or anything. And then we were uplifted back to Nyamasota airstrip. And then all we did from then onward is every now and again, some of us would go back into Mozambique to go and check out camps that the aircraft had picked up and things. And eventually, Obsable fizzled out. But you know, the sad thing about that was, whilst we were careering around in Mozambique, the Zanda were busy setting themselves up properly in the Centenary, Darwin area, little to be known to anybody. And I don't know if you read the book written by Peter Boyer.
No.
It's about the the Rhodesian Air Force, and he commented on he was flying around in that particular Centenary Darwin area, and he was quite convinced whilst he was flying under there that he come across a very, very big base camp inside Rhodesia. But nobody sort of took much notice of it, unfortunately. Special branch was saying, no, there's no activity in here. All their info is quiet. But as we all know, it wasn't so. And anyway, December arrived in 1972 when the terrorists attacked the farms in Centenary. And once again, support group bore the brunt of a landmine, going to their rescue onto a farm and things like that, where guys were killed and so on. And from then on, basically, it was all out, non-stop bush operations, one after the other after the other. And 73 came, we were spending 8 to 10 weeks in the bush and going home for 10 days. And it was and if we weren't on fire force, you were patrolling. And a lot of the patrols were done in Mozambique at that time. We spent a lot of time in Mozambique. And I can't remember, John, if you were part of that, a couple of those jaunts into Mozambique with Tim Bax and myself. And I want to bring a particular incident with our Timbaks on one of those jaunts into Mozambique. Also, you know, whenever you found spoor in Mozambique, you followed it because it would lead you somewhere, guaranteed. And it's exactly the same. And we were following these group of tracks, and we'd also stop for a tea break because with it being so hot, we used to start like 5 in the morning, walk till about 10. And at midday heat, you would rest up because of it, you know, Mozambique was an extremely dry place. Water was always in a short supply. And and whilst we were sitting in one of our tea breaks, a bunch of Frelimo oaks walked into old Paul Kruger, who was on the one side, I was on the other side, and there was a bit of firefight, and with no casualties on either side. And anyway, we set off after these guys, and once again we came into another big base camp, and we sort of swept through, picked up all around defense, and we said, well, they've gone now, we might as well carry on with our tea. And the guys were brewing and things like that, and Timbaks and Bruce Simmons were sitting in the center there to one side, and a whole lot of trees. And Timbaks said, he called us on the radio, can you, all you guys just come in here, we need to discuss a plan here. So I had my mug of tea and busy crossing over to where Timbaks was. And once again, all hell let loose. What had happened, the Frelimo had come back and had seen where we were, and had decided now to give us a stonking. And I remember seeing old Timbaks sitting on his bum, lifting his legs as the bullets were flying around his feet and everything. It's funny now, but it wasn't funny then, I can assure you. And anyway, I had old Dave Ottman. He was my MAG gunner, and I just yelled at him. I said, get firing on that ridge to your side there. And he just laid in with that MAG. And the other guys laid in as well. Anyway, I grabbed a couple of guys, ran around, picked up some, and to form up a sweep line. And during the sweep, we actually picked up 8 dead Frelimo soldiers that had been killed.
Sure.
So 1 for us, none for them. And now nobody in that, because most of the fire was actually concentrated where Tim Baxton was sitting. It was unreal. You know, he just sat on his bum there with his feet in the air. And you know, it's funny, but it wasn't funny then. So that was, you know, into 1973. It was either you patrolled in Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, or Mozambique. That was your bush if you went on Fire Force. And Fire Force, we were all on a learning curve then in 73. You know, people were trying out. There was lots of things going at me. And it was also towards the end of 73 that the Selous Scouts were getting formed. So, you know, things were going to change. But the only thing I was sad about was so many of our good soldiers, good officers, good senior NCOs left to go and join the Selous Scouts. And I remember sitting there at 3 Commando, Bruce Simmons, Paul Kruger, Timbaks, they all went. And before they left, they said, don't you want to come with Log? I said, nah, that's not my thing then. I said, I'm quite happy here in the RLI. And I said, I'm going to make my career here in the RLI. And which I did. And anyway, so off the guys went. And as I said, we lost a lot of good soldiers, good men went there. And which was a pity because, but that's what they wanted to go and do. So I don't begrudge them. You know, as I always said, there were a lot of guys that had a lot of influence in my life. And guys like Tim Baxter, Bruce Simmons, Dennis Crockham, the guys from the tracking course, all of them, you know, Jerry Strong and Kip Donald, they had a huge, huge influence in my life in the army. And I wasn't prepared to go to Selous Scouts. I was always a bit of a disciplinarian, and I still am, funny enough.
Yeah.
And I think being that disciplinarian stood me good in the army, and also the people that served under me.
And my very first contact was with you and Tim Bax in Mozambique. Selous Scouts had located a camp. I don't know how many people were in this camp, but apparently there were about 300 gooks in this camp in Mozambique. And we had 4 G cars and 1 K car and a couple of fixed wing aircraft. And I remember the 4 G cars dropped off 4 stop groups. I was in a stick with, I think Marius Murray was a young Lance Corporal there. He was my stick leader at the time with the A63 radio. That was my very first contact. I don't think we killed a lot of, I think the stop groups probably, we killed about 14 or 20 tours. And I remember there was a special branch guy there and they were looking for an arms cache, which they never found. And yeah, that was my very first contact in Mozambique with you and Kevin Taylor and Tim Bax and Harry File and little Chris Bernard and Martin Geldenes, and that was end of 74. And so the Selous Scouts fort was already there, and we were by the soccer field there where all the choppers were, remember, at Jock Darwin. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know if that helps you.
No, when I went in 70, because that's when I know Tim Bax didn't go in 73, but I mean that's when, you know, being the Selous Scouts started to recruit a lot of, you know, guys from RLI. And I mean, never mind just 3 Commando guys. They were going from 1 Commando, 2 Commando, and of course SAS guys were joining there. And I just felt that at that particular stage of the game, you know, they denuded the RLI of good senior NCOs who had been around for a while. And you actually needed those guys there, you know, because with the experience thing. But he is what it may. That was life. Yeah. And, you know, and in 74, you know, things started to change a lot. The fire force got more efficient. And especially with the Selous Scouts in 75, you know, in full operational doing their job. And, you know, fire force was starting to become quite a thing. But in those early fire force days, you know, there was only 3 G cars plus the K car. And so you had 12 guys who would go and get dropped to stop groups. The other guys had to drive on the trucks as the land tail to get as close as possible. And they would be brought in as the second wave and things like that. And they are just to be fun, eh? But we had some quite hair-raising punch-ups in those days. You know, the tours weren't so aggressive as they became in 1979. But they were, we were still taking the odd casualty, and they weren't really firing on the helicopters as much as what old Beaver Shaw says in those days. I don't know if Beaver Shaw was there in 74, 75. But he definitely gives some good accounts in 79, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And then, you know, life was just non-stop push. It was either patrol Mozambique, Fire Force, or patrol Rhodesia. And then, of course, 75, Op Thrasher opened. So now it was more Fire Force than ever before. And I think in 75 and 76, we weren't even going home. They were sending a troop back at a time for R&R. The Commando would stay behind wherever they were.
Yeah.
And I remember once within 3 Commando, I think we spent something like 5 months in the Mtali area. Grand Reef, Inyanga, Ondi Valley. We just never went home. We were going back at a troop at a time. And that comes to me the one time, it was 14 troops time to go home. I was acting OC of 14 troop. We didn't have an officer. And we climbed on our trucks early in the morning to go back. And it was that particular day that Hill 31 happened in Ondi Valley.
Yeah.
With that huge, massive contact that lasted the whole day. And I think that day was the biggest ever accumulative of terrorists killed in one particular Fire Force contact on Hill 31. And for the loss of 1 troopie, which was a shame for Da Costa.
Yeah.
Now, there were a couple of guys slightly wounded and things like that, but hats off to those guys who climbed up and down that mountain all day. Okay? And of course, when we got back to Salisbury, we heard all about it. So we weren't happy chappies. We said, shit, what are we doing here? We should have been there.
Yeah.
But that was just the way the cookie crumbled. Eh?
Yeah.
And, I just want to go back to August of 1975. It was a very sad day. One of those days there when Lance Corporal Harry Fowler was killed. No shame. He'd been sent to the RLI by his parents. His dad was a colonel in the South African Army, and he'd been sent there to go and get experience. And he was a good little soldier, climbed quickly to become a Lance Corporal, great guy. And we were in the Pachanza Keep area. We were doing ambushes and OPs and the like. And I was about 3 clicks away from, very, very close to the keep. I was about a click away from the keep, but there was also like a pathway area. And Harry was about 2 clicks away from me on another path. It wasn't even dark properly when we heard firing coming from their side. And I tried calling on the radio to see what was, and there was no answer. And I called and I called and I called, no answer. And eventually, our little Bernard came up on the radio. And he said, "We've got it." I said, "Yeah, what's happening?" He said, "No, Harry's dead." It was just, there was enough light for me. I said, "All right, I'm coming." So we ran, me and my 3 guys, to the keep. Cajoled the protection force there for their 2-5. And we drove to where the guys were. Because I just thought that I'm not leaving those 3 troopies on their own there. And anyway, we got to where they were. There were some buildings around there which we cleared with grenades and things like that. Wasn't too sure what was going on. And I loaded the 3 troopies up, and of course Harry. It was a sad day, Johan, because out of my whole time in the RLI, whether I was in 3 Commando, Support Commando, although he wasn't directly with me within 10 yards, he was the only guy in my troop that I ever lost.
Yeah, it hit me hard too. Harry was my best friend. And in 14 Troop, we were good buddies. Actually, I lost two really good friends. The other was old Matt Lamb, strange enough.
Yeah.
Also a good buddy of mine.
Correct.
But Harry and I clicked somehow. He was a tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed. He was a lovely boy. Yeah,
he was a lovely guy. He was such a pleasant. He was really a pleasant.
I believe it was a little bit of shrapnel from a stick grenade that got
correct.
him in the throat.
It was a stick grenade that got him in the neck. I mean, how pathetic was that? But there again, why was he sitting up?
Yeah,
so that's what the story was. Right?
Martin,
instead of lying down.
Martin Geldenhuys spoke to me, and he said they saw the stick grenade being thrown, and it was fizzing. It made a fizzing kind of sound, and they all took cover. And then when it went off, they got up and they returned fire. And then another stick, but only 3 of them got up and returned fire. And then another stick grenade was thrown, and they all took cover again. And when he took cover, he landed in a pool of Harry's blood. And then he realized.
Yeah.
He said that affected him for the rest of his life. He'll never forget that memory. And yeah, a very sad day that was. Yeah.
It was. And but anyway, 76 came, and it was Hondi Valleys and patrols in Hondi Valley. And what a dreadful place to patrol in. The buffalo being. Yeah. But it was terrible in that Hondi Valley.
Gaboon vipers.
Bush and all sorts.
Yeah.
That Hondi Valley was a nightmare. And anyway, we'd been in on one of our trips in the Hondi Valley there, and I was sitting on my proverbial OP one day, and old Jerry Strong came up from the radio and said, stand by for uplift. I want you to head for the road. You're going to be uplifted. So I said, why? I said, tell you when you get back. And anyway, the whole of 14 troopers getting uplifted. So we head for the road, get picked up, and on our way back, we bump into these cops driving like crazy. And they're yelling, we've just been ambushed, we've just been ambushed. So we said, where? Down there. So we said, well, take us. They said, we're not going there. So I said, well, just show us a bit. You don't have to go all the way. So anyway, they took us and they stopped about a kilometer. They said, there. So anyway, old Jug Thornton, Gordon Thornton was our troop officer then. Anyway, we jumped out, D-bus, both sides of the road, swept down, came across the ambush position, found some tracks, and I was following the tracks. And there were AK doppies lying all over the show. And anyway, we came to this village. And we asked the oaks there. I mean, there were doppies lying in the village, you know.
Sure.
No, they know nothing. So, of course, the guys set about their duties. Okay. And anyway, now we're chatting, Gordon Thornton and myself, looking at the maps, chatting to Jerry Strong. So I said, all right. From that village where I was, it was about a kilometer. There was a stream, about 500 meters, tributary running down. But when we were chatting to Doug, I said, you see that Como down there? I said, I wonder if that's not the RV point down there. You know, it was quite a prominent feature. So he said, maybe. So he said, all right, what we'll do, we'll go around in the trucks. There's a school up here. You de-bus there. And then you sweep down to the river. And then when you get onto the river, you sweep down. I'll go down there to the Gomo and go and act as a stop group.
Yeah.
So he said, fine. But now, anyway, in the interim period, I found out why am I being recalled. So Jake said, you've been posted. I said, to where? He said, no, you're going to support Commando. So here I was pissed off. I was really annoyed. And, you know, I'd made 3 Commando in my life.
Yeah.
You know, was determined. I knew I was getting close to becoming a colour sergeant because I'd done my exams. I'd passed my exam. I'd done my time as a sergeant, so I knew it was close. He said, no, you're going to support Commando as their CQMS. And I said, well, why can't somebody else go? And all due respect to my friend Johnny Norman, he was also in 3 Commando at the time. And I said, but Johnny Norman and I are on the same boat here. Why doesn't he go? And he's come from 1 Commando. He's an outcast to 3 Commando. But Johnny and I were big friends, and I think we'll still laugh about that many years.
Yeah.
I said, send Johnny Norman. I want to stay here. And they said, no, you are going. End of story. No more arguing. I was annoyed. Mumbling, grumbling, typical, just like a bloody troopy. Anyway, we got to the school, de-bus, and I was cross. And I said, right, guys, get in behind me, single file. We're going down to the river. And we walk. And as we're getting close to the river, now Don Price mentioned the other day something about premonition. 6th sense, eh? And I just said to the guy, stop. I said, right, everybody, extended line. I said, wake up. I said, switch on properly now. Anyway, we all go down at the ready, because it was quite thick bush there. We go down. And as I get to the river, because my eyes always looking for tracks and things like that, you know, that was part of my thing. Rachis, there were footprints coming down this little path and into the riverbed and turning to my left as such. I was just about to look to the left to see what was going on. And my MG gunner was on my left, and he was a Brazilian oak. He opened up. So I said, what are you shooting at? He said, no, there's an oak sitting under the tree here. And he said he was aiming his AK at you. So I said, well, thank you for that, old chap. Anyway, I went up to this guy. He was dead. Picked up his AK. And the clown had forgotten to change his magazine. Now, how's that for a stroke of luck?
Sure.
He's forgotten to change his magazine after the ambush. So he had an empty magazine and an empty rifle.
Sure.
So, yeah, there was another stroke of luck.
Bad soldier.
Anyway,
Saved your day.
whatever. My good luck.
Yeah.
And anyway, we swept around there. We found where the guys had been based up. No, we were now about 200 meters from the same village that we were in about an hour earlier.
Mm.
But there was nothing left there. And a chopper arrived to help look, and nothing happened. And we didn't do anything further from there. You know, it was time to go back to base because I had to be on the truck the next morning to go back to Salisbury. So that was my finale in 3 Commando.
Mm.